After my mum died, my father brought another lady into the house barely a week after her death. Before my mother ever came into my father's life, there was her, Rose. Back then, everyone in our neighborhood knew about their relationship. My father was a simple man, hardworking, calm, and respected. He had just gotten a stable job as a civil servant, and every young woman in town admired him. But somehow, he chose Rose, the prettiest face with the most dangerous tongue. At first, things looked perfect. Rose was beautiful, no doubt. Her smile could melt the hardest heart, and her laughter could fill an entire room. My father loved her deeply. He took her everywhere, church programs, weddings, even to visit his family in the village. But Rose had a side that only those close to her could see, a side my father tried so hard to ignore. She was proud, too proud, and jealous in a way that frightened people. If another woman so much as greeted my father, Rose would flare up. Once, at a friend's wedding, one of my father's female colleagues hugged him casually. Rose stood up in front of everyone and slapped the woman across the face. "Next time, hug your own man," she shouted. The whole hall went silent. My father was so embarrassed that he left immediately. But the next day, Rose showed up crying, kneeling before him. "You know I love you too much," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I just can't stand seeing you with another woman." He forgave her, like he always did. People warned him. My grandmother told him more than once. "A woman who can't control her temper will destroy your peace. Beauty fades, but character stays." But he didn't listen. He thought love could change her. Then came the lies. She started accusing him of cheating every time he came home late from work. Once, she even followed him secretly to his office just to confirm he wasn't with someone else. When she didn't find anything, she stormed into his workplace and shouted at him in front of his colleagues. It was humiliation after humiliation. Still, my father stayed. He kept hoping that she would grow up, that she would change. But instead, things got worse. She started demanding money constantly, not because she needed it, but because she loved the power it gave her. "If you really love me, buy me that phone," she would say. "Prove you care by giving me something I can show my friends." It became too much. The breaking point came one Sunday evening. My father had invited her over for dinner with his family. Everything was going fine until my aunt mentioned another woman, a quiet, humble lady from church named Grace. "That Grace girl will make a good wife for any man," my aunt had said casually. That was it. Rose slammed her spoon down and shouted, "So now you're trying to replace me, right? Is that what this is about?" She started throwing things, the plate, the food, even the cup of water in her hand. My father's mother had to pull her outside. She cursed everyone on her way out and didn't return for weeks. That night, my father finally realized what everyone else had seen long before. Rose wasn't in love with him. She was in love with control. He ended things with her the next morning. She didn't take it well. She begged, cried, threatened, and even pretended to faint in his compound. But my father stood his ground. For the first time, he said no. A few months later, he met my mother, the woman who would become his peace. Where Rose shouted, my mother listened. Where Rose demanded, my mother gave. Where Rose sought attention, my mother sought understanding. My father said it felt like God sent her to heal the part of him that Rose had broken. But Rose never let go. Even after my parents got married, she would show up occasionally, pretending to check on an old friend. But everyone knew what she really wanted. Sometimes she'd wait outside the gate, pretending to sell something nearby just to watch them pass. Once, she even told one of her friends, "He will come back. He can't forget me. I will make sure of that." People laughed it off then, but no one knew how serious she was. Because when she finally realized my father would never come back, she made a vow. If she couldn't have him, no one else would. When my father met my mother, he used to say it felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a smoke-filled room. Her name was Grace, and truly that's what she was to him, Grace. They met at the hospital where my mother worked as a nurse. My father had gone there to visit a colleague who was sick, and while he was waiting at the reception, my mother approached him politely, asking if he needed help. He always said he couldn't forget her smile that day, soft, calm, and genuine. Unlike Rose, who spoke like she was in a battle, my mother's voice carried peace. It had a gentleness that made you listen without her trying too hard. At first, he didn't think much of it. He simply thanked her and went on his way. But fate had other plans. He ran into her again at church the following Sunday. She was leading the choir, singing with her eyes closed, lost in the worship. My father said he felt something stir inside him that day, not the loud excitement of attraction, but a quiet, certain warmth. They started talking after service, and from that day, everything changed. Their relationship was different, peaceful, respectful, full of laughter and friendship. My mother wasn't loud or flashy, but her presence filled a room. She never asked for too much, never demanded things to prove love. She just wanted time, understanding, and honesty. When my father brought her home to meet his family, everyone approved instantly. My grandmother hugged her tightly and whispered, "My son, this one will bring you rest." And she did. Their marriage was a simple one, but full of joy. They didn't have much, but they had each other. My father would often come home tired from work, and my mother would serve his food with that same warm smile that first drew him in. He would sit by the table, eat slowly, and watch her move around the kitchen, sometimes humming soft hymns. They shared everything, stories, jokes, struggles. When he got his first promotion, they danced around the small living room barefoot, laughing like children. When money was tight, they sat down together and planned carefully without blaming each other. Neighbors admired them. People called them the perfect couple. And they really were, at least to me. I grew up surrounded by their laughter. My father always said my mother brought light into his life, a light he thought he'd never see again after the chaos of his past. Every morning, she packed his lunch and kissed his forehead. Every night, he massaged her shoulders and told her how lucky he was. Even after years of marriage, they still acted like newlyweds. My father bought her small gifts, nothing extravagant. Maybe just a scarf or her favorite fruit, but she always received them with pure delight. When people teased my father for being too soft around her, he would laugh and say, "You don't understand. Peace at home is better than pride outside." My mother adored him just as much. She would always defend him when anyone complained about men or marriages. "Not all men are the same," she'd say with a smile. "Some just need the right kind of love to become the best version of themselves." Their bond grew stronger when I was born. My father was there through it all, holding her hand during labor, crying when he heard my first cry. He called me their miracle. Our home was full of warmth, the smell of food, laughter, prayers, and love. It was the kind of home that made even visitors feel at peace. And that was why my father's old lover, Rose, couldn't bear it. Because what she had once destroyed in her pride, another woman had built with patience and grace. And that envy, quiet but poisonous, was what would one day come for our happiness. Rose never truly disappeared. For years, she lingered around the edges of their happiness, like a shadow that refused to fade, no matter how bright the light was. At first, it was subtle. She would send messages through mutual friends, pretending to check in. She would call during holidays or send gifts with notes that read, "Just remembering an old friend." My father ignored them. He had moved on, and he made it clear that he wanted nothing more to do with her. But Rose wasn't the kind of woman who accepted rejection easily. When polite gestures didn't work, she became bolder. She showed up at his workplace one afternoon, dressed elegantly, carrying a lunch bag. My father was shocked to see her. "Rose, what are you doing here?" he asked quietly, looking around nervously. "I just wanted to see you," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've lost weight. I thought maybe you'd appreciate a home-cooked meal like the old days." He shook his head firmly. "That's not appropriate. I'm a married man." Her smile faltered. "So that's it. After all we had, you just forget me like that." "It's not about forgetting," he replied. "It's about peace. You and I were never meant to last. Please respect that." Rose left without another word, but her pride burned hotter than ever. From that day, she made it her mission to remind him she still existed. Sometimes she'd pass by our street intentionally, pretending to greet neighbors while stealing glances into our compound. Other times, she would call my father's office phone, pretending to be a client just to hear his voice. My mother knew about it. She didn't confront her or even complain to my father. She simply smiled and said, "A woman who can't let go of the past will destroy herself before she destroys anyone else." And she was right. But Rose didn't stop. When her quiet games failed, she tried another route, pity. One evening, she came to our gate, dressed in torn clothes, crying loudly. I was too young to understand, but I still remember her voice echoing through the compound. "Please, let me explain. I have nowhere else to go." My father didn't open the gate. He stood from a distance and told her calmly to leave. But she stayed there for hours, weeping and shouting that she had changed, that she was sorry, that she couldn't live knowing he had given his heart to another woman. Eventually, the neighbors gathered and chased her away. Still, she didn't give up. A few months later, she pretended to be seriously ill. She sent word through a friend that she was dying and wanted to see him one last time. My father refused. He told my mother everything, and she simply held his hand and said, "If she's truly dying, may God heal her. But if it's a lie, may her lies return to her." And they did. It turned out Rose was perfectly fine. When her fake illness didn't bring him back, she changed her tactic again. This time, she turned to threats. She told his colleagues that my father had promised to marry her and abandoned her. She even spread rumors that my mother had stolen him from her, but no one believed her. Everyone who knew them could see that my parents' love was pure. It didn't come from manipulation or deceit. Every attempt she made ended in humiliation. Every plan she set fell apart. Years passed and Rose's life went downhill. No relationship worked. Men came and left. Some said she had become bitter, others said she was cursed. People pitied her, but she didn't want pity, she wanted revenge. And deep inside her heart, something dark began to grow, the kind of resentment that festers when pride and heartbreak meet. Because to her, my mother wasn't just another woman. She was the proof that Rose had lost. And one day, that bitterness turned into a decision. If she couldn't have my father, then no one, not even the woman who gave him peace, would. Rose's bitterness grew stronger each time she saw them, my father and my mother, living the life she believed was supposed to be hers. For years, she avoided places she knew they might be. But life has a cruel way of testing the heart, and fate kept pushing her into their path. The first time she saw them together, after the marriage, was at the church. My parents had come with me, dressed neatly, sitting side by side on the third row from the altar. I was just a little girl then, playing with my mother's handbag while the choir sang. Rose walked in late, wearing a bright yellow lace gown and a forced smile. She didn't expect to see them there, and when she did, her steps faltered. There they were. My father's hand rested gently on my mother's lap as he whispered something that made her giggle softly. It was such a small gesture, but to Rose, it cut like a knife. She stood frozen for a moment, her eyes burning. The usher had to tap her twice before she realized she was blocking the aisle. Throughout the service, she couldn't focus. Every hymn sounded like mockery. Every word from the pastor, especially about love and forgiveness, felt like an insult aimed directly at her. When it was time to shake hands with the people beside her, she avoided looking at them, pretending to be deep in prayer. But before leaving the church, she made sure to walk past my mother, her perfume strong and suffocating. She smiled, that tight, bitter kind of smile, and said, "Grace, you're looking well. Marriage suits you." My mother smiled politely. "Thank you, Rose. I hope life has been kind to you." Rose only nodded and walked away quickly, her heels clicking like angry footsteps. That night, she sat alone in her room, staring at the wall. The image of them sitting together wouldn't leave her mind. The second time she saw them was at the market. My mother was shopping for foodstuff, balancing her basket gracefully as she compared prices. My father had accompanied her that day, something he loved doing. He always said he liked how my mother smiled when bargaining. She had a way of turning even traitors into friends. Rose saw them before they saw her. She stood near a stall, pretending to look at tomatoes, her heart pounding as she watched my father help my mother carry her bags. They were laughing, talking about what to cook for dinner. It was the kind of simple, natural love Rose had never been able to give or receive, calm, respectful, joyful. A part of her wanted to walk up to them, to remind him she still existed. But another part, the darker one, whispered, "Look at what she took from you." When they finally noticed her, my mother greeted her warmly, as if nothing had ever happened between them. "Ah, Sister Rose, how are you? It's been long." Rose forced a smile, gripping her purse tightly. "I'm fine, just managing. You two seem very happy." My father simply nodded and said, "We thank God." The word stung, "We thank God." They sounded so final, like a door that had been shut forever. That evening, Rose went home empty-handed. She had come to the market to buy food, but she left with something else, a heavier heart. The last time she saw them together was at the mall, years later. By then, I was older. We had gone shopping for school supplies, and my parents were teasing each other over which color of bag I should get. My father wanted a blue one. My mother said pink was better. They laughed so hard that even the cashier smiled. Rose saw them from a distance. She was sitting alone at the ice cream shop, staring at them through the glass. She noticed how my father leaned close to my mother when she spoke, how their hands brushed against each other, how he looked at her, the same look he used to give her once upon a time. That was when something snapped inside her. She realized no matter how many years passed, no matter how much she tried to hide her pain or pretend she'd moved on, the truth remained. She had lost him completely. And worse, she had lost him to a woman who didn't even try to compete. To Rose, that was unbearable. That night, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat in the dark, staring into space, and whispered to herself, "If I can't have him, she won't either." That was the moment everything changed. The jealousy that once burned quietly turned into something far more dangerous, an obsession that would soon turn deadly. Before darkness crept into our home, there was so much light. My parents' marriage was the kind people admired quietly, sometimes with envy, sometimes with hope. It wasn't because they were rich or powerful, no. It was because of how simple and genuine their love was. They made marriage look easy. My father was the kind of husband every woman prayed for, gentle, devoted, and kind. And my mother was the kind of woman who carried peace wherever she went. Together, they created a home that felt like heaven on earth. Every morning started the same way. The sound of gospel songs playing softly from the radio, the smell of breakfast drifting through the air, and my parents talking and laughing in the kitchen like newlyweds. My father never left the house without hugging my mother goodbye. He would hold her for a few seconds longer than usual, whisper something only she could hear, and she'd blush like a young bride all over again. Even neighbors noticed. Sometimes they would tease them, saying, "You people are turning marriage into a fairy tale, oh." And my mother would laugh, saying, "It's not a fairy tale. It's just friendship with love inside." That was the secret. They were friends first. They talked about everything. They prayed together every night, holding hands tightly. They didn't hide their struggles, but they faced them together. When money was short, my mother would find ways to make things easier, cooking creative meals out of little ingredients, sewing old clothes into new ones, and still smiling like everything was fine. When my father came home from work, tired and dusty, she'd meet him at the door with a towel and a soft voice saying, "Welcome, my king." He would chuckle and reply, "And how is my queen today?" Then he'd lift me up, spin me around, and the three of us would laugh until our stomachs hurt. Weekends were always special. On Saturdays, my father helped with house chores, washing his own clothes while my mother cooked. Music filled the house, and they'd dance between chores, teasing each other. Sometimes my father would take her hand and pull her close, whispering, "If I had married anyone else, I wouldn't have known peace. And my mother would smile shyly and say, "You would have still found peace, just not this kind." Sundays were for church, and afterward, we'd visit my grandmother in the village or go out for a family walk. They loved taking pictures, old, faded photographs that still smell like home. In every one, my father's arm is around my mother's shoulder, both of them smiling like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. At night, after dinner, my father would sometimes read the Bible out loud while my mother braided my hair. When he got to a verse about love or faith, he would look at her with that soft expression that said, "You're my answered prayer." And truly, she was. Even their little disagreements were sweet. When my mother was upset, she'd go silent, not shouting, not nagging, just quiet. My father would follow her around the house, making silly jokes until she smiled again. He couldn't stand her silence. "You can scold me, but don't stop talking to me," he'd beg, and she'd finally laugh, shaking her head. They understood each other deeply, without words, without effort. Their love wasn't loud, it was steady, the kind that made others believe in marriage again. And then there was me, their only child, the piece that tied them even closer. My mother loved to tell me, "You're the proof that God blessed our union." My father would nod and add, "And the reason I want to live long, to watch you become great." We were happy, genuinely happy. Our home was filled with laughter, peace, and love so strong that even visitors could feel it. Everything was perfect, until the day Rose came back into the picture. But before that darkness came, we lived in light. And that's what makes what happened next so painful, because happiness like that was too pure to end the way it did. Peace is a fragile thing. Sometimes it doesn't end with noise. It just begins to fade, little by little, until you realize it's gone. That was how it happened in our home. It began the day Rose came back. She appeared suddenly, after years of silence, dressed in bright colors and a wide smile, the kind that hides something. No one invited her, yet she showed up one evening, standing by our gate, carrying a nylon bag filled with fruits. I still remember my mother's reaction. She looked surprised, but she didn't frown. That was the kind of woman she was, calm and kind, even to those who meant her harm. "Rose," she said softly, "it's been so long, how are you?" "I'm fine," Rose replied sweetly. "I was passing by and decided to greet my old friend." My father froze when he heard her voice. He came out of the house, his face tight. The air between them changed immediately, heavy, tense, like thunder before a storm. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "I come in peace," she smiled. "Can I greet my old friend?" My mother, ever gracious, invited her in. She served her juice, made her comfortable, even though she could sense the discomfort in my father's eyes. Rose complimented the house, admired the decorations, and pretended to be happy for them. But beneath her soft words, something dark lingered. When she left that night, my mother sighed. "She's changed," she said. "She seems calmer now." My father shook his head slowly. "No, Grace. People like her don't change, they only wait." He was right. From that evening on, Rose began visiting more often. At first, she came with innocent reasons to drop off fruits or check on how the family was doing. But my father didn't like it. He avoided her politely, keeping his distance. Then strange things began to happen. One morning, my mother's favorite necklace went missing. She searched everywhere, even turned the wardrobe upside down, but it was gone. 2 days later, Rose brought it back, saying she found it by the gate. Another time, my father's shirt, the one my mother gifted him on their anniversary, disappeared from the clothesline. When my mother asked Rose about it jokingly, Rose smiled and said, "Maybe the wind carried it to my side." She said it like a joke, but my father didn't laugh. He started praying more, waking up in the middle of the night to read psalms aloud. My mother didn't understand why at first, until the changes began. My father started acting differently. He became quieter, distant. Sometimes he'd stare at nothing for long minutes, his food untouched. Other times, he'd snap at my mother over little things, something he'd never done before. At night, he'd wake up sweating, confused, claiming to have strange dreams. In some of them, he said he saw my mother drowning. In others, he saw Rose smiling at him, dressed in white. It scared him, and it scared my mother even more. They fasted, prayed, and even invited their pastor over, but nothing changed. It was as if something unseen was eating away at him, clouding his mind, dulling his love. And then one day, after another argument, something about a misplaced key, he looked at my mother with blank eyes and said, "Grace, maybe we shouldn't have been together." My mother froze. Those words broke her. The man who once called her his peace now looked at her like a stranger. From that day, things went downhill fast. He stopped eating her food. He stopped praying with her. He stopped smiling. He began spending more time outside the house, sometimes coming home late, smelling of strange perfume. When my mother asked, he said nothing. He just walked away. I didn't understand much back then, but I knew something had changed in my father. His eyes no longer looked soft when he saw my mother. There was a coldness in him that felt wrong, unnatural. Then one night, my mother had a dream. She saw a dark woman standing over her while she slept, whispering my father's name over and over. The next morning, she told my father about it. He just laughed bitterly and said, "You think everything is spiritual. Maybe I'm just tired of pretending." That was the moment my mother's heart broke completely. But she didn't know, none of us did, that Rose had gone far beyond words or visits. She had gone to people who dealt in things darker than night. She wanted what she couldn't have, and she was willing to destroy anyone who stood in her way. Their marriage was everything people prayed for, the kind that made others believe love still existed. My father and mother, David and Amara, were the picture of happiness. From the very first year of their union, everyone could see that they truly completed each other. My mother had a gentle spirit that balanced my father's strength. Where he was bold and outspoken, she was calm and thoughtful. He loved her laughter, said it was the sound that healed him after long, tiring days. Every morning, they prayed together before starting the day, and every evening, no matter how busy he was, my father always came home to eat her food. Their small home was filled with warmth, not because it was rich or fancy, but because it was full of love. On weekends, they would dance together in the living room to old love songs. My father would spin her around, and she'd laugh until tears rolled down her cheeks. The neighbors would watch them from their windows and smile. When I was born, the joy in their home multiplied. My father called me his little sunshine, and my mother often said, "Now our love has taken a new form." They raised me with so much affection that sometimes it felt unreal. Every evening we'd sit together and talk about our day. My father never made a decision without consulting my mother first, and he often said, "Amara's words are my wisdom." People admired them deeply. In church, they sat together, always holding hands during service. At family gatherings, my father proudly introduced my mother to everyone. "This is my treasure," he would say, and she would blush shyly. Even when they had misunderstandings, they never let anger last through the night. My mother would make peace first, and my father would always apologize, even when he wasn't at fault. They prayed together, laughed together, built together. It was the kind of marriage that made other women wish for what my mother had, including Rose, the woman my father once loved. Rose's patience had run thin. Years of rejection, humiliation, and witnessing my parents' unshakable happiness had turned into a burning obsession. She wanted him back, and when she realized that words, gifts, and pity would never work, she resorted to something darker, something that would break my father's mind and heart. It started subtly. She called him under the pretense of needing advice. She sent small gifts with special blessings written on notes. She told him that these gifts were charms to protect him, to bring him luck at work. My father, trusting and unsuspecting, initially laughed at the notion. He didn't believe in such things. But Rose was clever. She worked slowly, subtly planting doubts and whispers into his mind. "Are you sure you're happy?" she would ask softly during her visits. Sometimes people smile, but inside they feel trapped. It was dangerous because she never accused him of loving my mother less. She just made him question himself. And then the charms began. They were small at first, powders sprinkled in his shoes, little trinkets left in his bag. Every day, his thoughts grew foggy. He started forgetting things, misplacing items, becoming restless. His love for my mother didn't vanish immediately, but it became clouded, uncertain, like mist over a clear lake. Soon, arguments erupted where there had never been any. Minor things, a burnt dinner, a misplaced key, became battles. My father's anger seemed uncharacteristic, sharp and sudden. My mother was confused, heartbroken, and helpless. One evening, after a particularly strange argument over nothing at all, my father stormed out. My mother followed, desperate to talk sense into him. "David, what's happening to you?" she cried. He turned, eyes glazed, voice trembling. I don't know, Grace. Something isn't right." It was then my mother realized it wasn't him, not entirely. Something unseen was controlling him. Rose had succeeded. But she wasn't done. While my father's mind was clouded by her charm, she took the next step in her plan. She contacted men she claimed could remove obstacles. She whispered her hatred into the ears of people skilled in dark work, and she set her sights fully on my mother. It was subtle at first, a poisoned meal meant to frighten, a nearly invisible tripwire in the house, little things designed to make her feel unsafe. My mother, always strong, laughed off some of it at first, thinking she was imagining danger. But deep down, she felt it, a shadow following her every step. One night, as she slept, she had another vision, this time stronger, darker. She saw Rose standing over her, whispering my father's name while a chilling wind wrapped around the room. My mother awoke sweating and terrified. By morning, it was clear. Rose had gone far beyond obsession. She had become a predator, and our home, once full of laughter and warmth, had become her hunting ground. What followed next would change our lives forever. My father, still trapped in the charm's grip, became unable to see the danger looming in front of him. My mother, ever brave and full of love, would face the darkness alone. And the day Rose's plan finally succeeded was the day everything we knew about family, love, and trust was shattered. Rose's obsession had grown over the years, simmering like poison, and the day she decided to act, she did so with chilling precision. This was not a moment of impulsive anger. It was a calculated, methodical attack designed to take away everything my mother had built: her life, her peace, her family. For months, Rose had been watching our home. She studied our routines, noted when my father would be most distracted, and observed my mother's habits. She learned that my mother always prepared breakfast for the family, that she always sat by the window reading the Bible after dinner, and that she often stepped into the garden at exactly the same time each morning to tend the plants. Every detail mattered to her plan. It began quietly, small things at first. My mother would misplace a key, a small vase would be knocked over, a meal would taste slightly off. Each incident seemed accidental, each misstep minor. My father, already under the influence of Rose's subtle charms, started growing restless, irritable, and distracted. He blamed himself, unaware that something sinister was at work. Rose's true plan was far darker than minor inconveniences. She had enlisted men skilled in sinister acts, people who could manipulate life and death without leaving evidence. She bribed them, explained exactly how to make it appear natural, and timed everything to perfection. The fateful morning began like any other. The sun rose gently, birds chirped outside, and my mother moved about the house humming softly, completely unaware that this day had been chosen for her destruction. She prepared breakfast for my father and me, as she always did. My father, still under the charm, seemed distant but attentive, his movements mechanical. Rose appeared that morning, as always, under the guise of friendliness. She carried a basket of fruit, her bright dress hiding the darkness beneath. She greeted my mother with forced warmth and complimented the house, pretending to admire the family she so secretly hated. The poison had been prepared long before, a subtle, slow-acting substance that mimicked a heart attack. It was hidden carefully in a dish my mother would not suspect, a breakfast item she always enjoyed. When she served it to my father and me, she did not notice anything amiss. The moment she tasted it herself, it began to take hold. At first, it was subtle, a dizziness she thought was from the morning sun, a nausea she attributed to fatigue. Then the world began to tilt. Her vision blurred. Her legs weakened. She clutched the edge of the table, trying to steady herself. Panic rose in my chest as I watched her falter. "Mummy, what's happening?" I screamed, running to her side. Her eyes, once so full of life, looked frightened, searching for my father's face. But he stood frozen, trapped in the fog of Rose's charm, unable to move, unable to act. It's okay," she whispered, trying to calm me even as her own body betrayed her. Neighbors arrived, drawn by my cries. They tried desperately to help, but the poison acted swiftly. My mother gasped, clutched her chest, and collapsed onto the floor. Her breath came in shallow, panicked bursts. She tried to call my father's name to ask for help, but he could not hear her. Rose watched from a distance, her smile calm and calculated. Her plan had worked flawlessly. She had removed the obstacle that stood between her and the man she believed belonged to her. Within minutes, emergency services arrived, but it was too late. My mother's life had been stolen from her in a single, calculated act. To the world, it appeared sudden, a tragic accident, perhaps a heart attack. No one suspected the truth, not even the men who had helped her, for fear had sealed their lips. That day, our home, once filled with laughter, warmth, and peace, became a place of silence and grief. My father, under the charm, wandered aimlessly, unable to process what had happened. I cried until my throat ached, holding her lifeless hand, feeling the sharp, unbearable reality that she was gone, taken not by fate, but by deliberate evil. Rose's plan had succeeded in the worst possible way. She had destroyed my mother, destabilized my father, and left me, her child, to live in a world shadowed by her cruelty. Every detail had been meticulously executed, every moment calculated, until nothing was left but grief and emptiness. Even now, thinking of that day chills me to the bone. It was not a sudden act of rage or jealousy. It was long planned, patient, and cruel, the kind of evil that strikes silently, leaving the innocent unaware until it is far too late. After my mother's death, our home was swallowed by silence. The warmth, laughter, and love that had once filled every corner vanished overnight. My father was a shadow of the man he had been. The charm Rose had placed over him had taken full effect. He was distant, confused, and vulnerable. It was in this state that Rose began her next move. She appeared under the guise of sympathy, pretending to console my father. The first visit was subtle. She arrived at our gate with a basket of fruits and a warm smile, her eyes filled with what seemed like sorrow. My father, still weak and unsettled, answered the door without suspicion. "David, I heard about Amara. I'm so sorry," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. "I thank you," my father replied quietly, unsure why he felt a strange mix of comfort and unease. Rose lingered, offering kind words and gentle touches, a hand on his shoulder, a comforting pat on his arm. She spoke of grief and loss as if she understood him in a way no one else could. Over the next few days, her visits became more frequent. She came with food, small gifts, and soft words. Every time, she reminded him subtly that she had been there all along, a constant presence, someone who could understand his pain better than anyone else. "You must be hurting so much," she said one evening, as my father sat staring blankly into space. "It's okay to let someone lean on you." My father, weakened by the charm and grief, found himself drawn to her. He started listening, opening up about his confusion, his fear, and even the strange emptiness he felt without my mother. Rose nodded, sympathized, and guided him, planting seeds of dependency. She whispered carefully, never directly undermining my mother at first, but making subtle remarks that lingered in his mind. She was wonderful, yes, but sometimes love leaves us too soon. Sometimes people move on too easily. Her words created doubt, making him question the past, his decisions, and even his memories of my mother. Slowly, the man who had once been strong, loving, and devoted began relying on Rose, the very woman who had orchestrated my mother's death. I watched from the sidelines, confused and wary. There was something about her calm presence that unsettled me. She smiled too perfectly, spoke too gently, and always seemed to appear when my father was most vulnerable. Neighbors whispered that she seemed so kind, that she was there for him in his grief. But I knew better. I could feel the darkness behind her words, the cold calculation hidden beneath the sympathy. Each visit strengthened her hold over my father. She became the person he turned to for comfort, the one who filled the void my mother had left. And each day, the fog in his mind grew thicker, the charm anchoring him to her influence, making him forget the love he had shared with my mother. In those days, Rose perfected her disguise, the grieving, gentle woman, consoling the widower while secretly enjoying the chaos she had created. She had not only taken my mother's life, but she had begun to take her place, at least in my father's mind. And no one in the house could see it clearly, not me, not our neighbors, not even my father himself. Only Rose knew the full extent of the control she had gained. After Rose began her visits, her influence over my father grew stronger by the day. What had started as seemingly innocent consolation slowly turned into complete control. My father, still trapped in the fog of grief and the charm she had placed on him, began to depend on her for everything, his thoughts, his emotions, even his decisions. She visited almost daily, always appearing at the right moment, when he was most lonely, most lost, most vulnerable. Her smile seemed warm, her words comforting, and she always brought gifts, little things that made him feel seen in a way that now seemed more real than any memory of my mother. "David, it's okay to lean on someone," she whispered one afternoon, as he sat slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the floor. "I'll always be here for you." Each word she spoke was like a thread, weaving him further into her control. She never rushed, she never forced him. Instead, she guided, shaped, and manipulated. Slowly, the charm had made him forget the life he had with my mother. The love, the laughter, the warmth, all of it began to feel distant, like a dream he couldn't reach. Meanwhile, Rose planted seeds of doubt carefully. She reminded him of tiny disagreements my parents had had years ago, exaggerating them just enough to make him question if my mother had truly been the woman he thought she was. She suggested that he needed someone to support him now, someone who could truly understand him, someone like her. She was always calm, always patient, always there, at the precise moment he felt weakest, and she reinforced the charm's effect by subtly isolating him from memories of my mother. Photographs went missing, small mementos disappeared, and she would casually remark things like, "Old memories can hurt more than they help. Sometimes it's better to let go." The more time he spent with her, the more distant he became from the home my mother had built. He no longer noticed the lingering sadness in the house. He no longer questioned the quiet unease in my presence. The charm had done its work. My father's mind had been clouded enough that he could see only Rose, the woman who had orchestrated my mother's death. And while he leaned on her, believing she was offering comfort, Rose carefully orchestrated the next steps of her plan. She had already prepared everything to ensure that my mother's absence remained permanent and unquestioned. She knew how to manipulate those around her, how to turn grief into dependency, and how to make my father feel that she was the only person he could trust. It was in those months that Rose's hold became absolute. My father no longer questioned her presence. He no longer resisted her influence. Every visit, every smile, every soft word pushed him further under her control, and the house, once full of love, became a place where fear and manipulation thrived, all under the guise of consolation. By the time anyone realized the extent of her influence, it was too late. The man who had once been the pillar of our family, the loving husband of my mother, had been completely ensnared by the very woman who had taken her from us. Months passed after my mother's death, and Rose's plan unfolded exactly as she had designed. The charm she had placed over my father, combined with her constant presence and manipulations, worked slowly but perfectly. The man who had once loved my mother deeply now seemed to forget her entirely, not because he wanted to, but because his mind had been clouded, reshaped, and directed toward Rose. It started subtly at first. My father began spending more time with her, listening to her advice, leaning on her for decisions about the house, the business, and even me. He no longer questioned her motives. Her presence felt comforting, almost natural. Friends and neighbors noticed the change, but no one could pinpoint why he had become so attached to a woman he had once left behind. Rose's charm had done more than cloud his thoughts. It had rewired his heart. He began seeing her not as the dangerous ex of his past, but as the woman who had been there for him through grief. Every word she spoke, every act of kindness, reinforced the magic she had planted in him. Slowly, admiration turned to affection, and affection into love, or what felt like love to him under the spell. Eventually, Rose began suggesting a more permanent step. "David, you deserve happiness again," she said one evening, her hand lightly touching his arm. "We've been through so much, maybe it's time to start a new chapter." He didn't hesitate. The idea of moving on with her seemed natural, even right. He felt no guilt, no remorse for leaving my mother. The charm had erased that part of him, leaving only the distorted perception Rose wanted him to have. Within weeks, the wedding was arranged quietly. The house buzzed with whispered gossip, but my father remained resolute. To him, it wasn't strange, it wasn't cruel, it felt like destiny. Rose, dressed in white, smiled as he took her hand in marriage. In that moment, she had not only won his heart, but had also secured her place in our lives permanently. The ceremony was simple, almost unremarkable to outsiders. But to us, to me, it felt like a betrayal carved into the very foundation of our family. The man who had once been devoted to my mother, who had built a home full of love, now stood with Rose, smiling and oblivious to the darkness that had brought them together. After the wedding, he became fully under her control. The charm continued to cloud his judgment, erasing lingering memories of my mother and any resistance he might have felt. Rose's victory was complete. She had destroyed the life my mother had built, manipulated my father into loving her again, and firmly inserted herself into our home, all while pretending to be a kind, grieving woman who had come to help him heal. Her smile hid the truth, that every word, every action, and every plan had been calculated to bring her to this moment. The charm had worked, and with it, she finally achieved what she had wanted all along. My father, in body and mind, was hers. After marrying my father, Rose wore her new role like a mask, and she wore it perfectly. To anyone who didn't know the truth, she was the ideal wife and the caring stepmother. But beneath the smiles and the gentle words, every action was calculated, every gesture a part of her long game. At first, it was subtle. She moved into the house quietly, carefully avoiding anything that might remind my father of my mother. She arranged the rooms, cleaned the kitchen, and even baked my father's favorite pastries. She learned about the routines my mother had established and followed them meticulously, giving the illusion that she respected what had come before, all while ensuring she gradually replaced it with herself. "David, I thought you might like this," she said one morning, presenting freshly brewed coffee just the way my father liked it. "Thank you," he murmured, smiling. For the first time in months, he looked calm, even content. With me, she was equally careful. She acted attentive and kind, asking about my school, my friends, even my hobbies. She attended church with us, smiled warmly at neighbors, and often spoke of wanting a happy family, words that seemed reassuring at first. "I just want us to be close," she said gently, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead one afternoon. "Your father and we care about you so much." She cooked meals my father and I loved, kept the house spotless, and even joined in on family activities. Sometimes, she laughed at my jokes or pretended to be interested in my schoolwork, making me believe she genuinely wanted to be part of our lives. Yet, despite the warmth, there was something off. Her attention always had a calculated edge. She would praise my father excessively, reminding him of how grateful he should be to have found her again, carefully planting the idea that life had been incomplete before her return. With me, her kindness was often paired with subtle manipulation, reminding me how lucky we were to have her now, making my mother feel like a distant memory. Neighbors and friends believed her. They commented on how she had stepped up for the family after tragedy. My father, still under the charm, saw only the loving wife and attentive mother, blind to the shadow behind her smile. She organized family dinners, planned trips, and even arranged little surprises for birthdays and holidays. Everything she did reinforced her image as the perfect woman, the one who had saved us from grief and brought stability back into the house. But for those who knew my mother, who had lived in the warmth of her real love, the contrast was painful. Rose's love was performative, precise, and manipulative. It was designed to control and dominate, not to nurture. Every act of kindness was a step further into her control, every smile a thread binding my father more tightly to her, every word a reminder that the past, my mother, our happiness, no longer belonged to us. The house had warmth again, yes, but it was a warmth built on deception, on charm, and on a carefully constructed illusion. Rose was no longer just a woman who wanted my father back. She had become the master of the life she had stolen. After the wedding, Rose's satisfaction was quiet but deep. To anyone who looked at her, she seemed calm, composed, even graceful. But inside, a storm of triumph and obsession roared. Years of waiting, planning, scheming, and manipulating had finally brought her to this moment. She was finally the woman my father called his wife. She had claimed the life she had wanted, the man she had never stopped desiring, and the home that had once belonged to another. For Rose, every calculated step she had taken, the charm, the visits, the manipulations, and the cruel orchestration of my mother's death, had been worth it. She walked through the house with a sense of quiet pride, arranging things, cooking meals, and smiling at my father, all while knowing the truth. He was hers now in mind and body, and there was no one to stop her. Finally, she whispered to herself one evening, alone in the bedroom she had claimed. It's mine, he's mine, everything is finally mine. She savored the feeling of victory in small, private ways. The way my father looked at her now, with trust and dependence, no longer with love for my mother, filled her with a dark joy. Every glance, every word he spoke to her, reinforced her belief that her years of planning had paid off. Even when she laughed at his jokes or served him his favorite meal, she felt an internal triumph. She had done what she had set out to do, replace my mother, step into her role, and rewrite the past in her favor. Every careful smile, every gentle word was a silent celebration of her cunning. But beneath the surface, that fulfillment was not just satisfaction, it was obsession realized. She had chased this for years, and now she held it all, my father, the house, and even the semblance of family life. To her, nothing could ever feel more complete. She would sit quietly in the evenings, watching my father, thinking of the days before he had been hers, and shivering with a sense of power. It wasn't just about marriage. It was about conquest, control, and the final proof that she could have everything she wanted if she was patient and cunning enough. For Rose, this wasn't happiness in the ordinary sense. It was fulfillment, the deep, dark satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. She had achieved what she had waited for all these years, and now the world, or at least the household she had invaded, belonged to her. Her triumph was complete. My father was hers. The home was hers. The void left by my mother was hers to fill. And every day she reminded herself of the power she had gained, power she had earned through patience, cunning, and a heart that had never forgotten what it wanted. With her purpose fulfilled, Rose began to wear her new role like armor, and like a mask. To the outside world, she was the perfect wife, the devoted partner who had helped my father through grief. To my father, still clouded by her charm, she was the anchor in his storm, the woman who understood him when no one else could. She was meticulous in her performance. Every morning, she prepared his favorite breakfast, carefully timing it so he would feel cared for before the day even began. She made sure the house was immaculate, as if it reflected not only her taste but her devotion. Every gesture, every smile, every word was calculated to cement her place in his heart and the home. With me, she played the attentive, caring stepmother. She asked about my school, my friends, and my hobbies, pretending genuine interest in my life. She laughed at my jokes, shared in my small triumphs, and even comforted me when I felt sad, all while subtly reminding me that she was the one my father needed now, the one who held the household together. "We're a family now," she would say softly, her voice sweet and calm. "Your father and I, we care about you very much." She joined church services with us, always smiling warmly at neighbors, and quickly became the friendly, caring woman everyone admired. People commented on her dedication and praised her for stepping in after such a tragedy. To them, she seemed almost saintly, the perfect woman in the perfect circumstances. But behind the mask, Rose remained calculating. She reinforced the charm's effect by subtly erasing memories of my mother from my father's mind. Photographs disappeared, personal items were rearranged or lost, and she would casually remark things like, "Old memories can weigh us down. Sometimes it's better to focus on the now." Every act of kindness served a dual purpose, maintaining the illusion of warmth while strengthening her hold over the household. She had replaced my mother not only in my father's heart, but also in our daily lives, leaving a void that only she could fill, or so it seemed. Even when I felt wary of her, she had a way of soothing my doubts with gentle words and smiles that seemed too sincere to question. She had mastered the art of appearing loving while keeping control, making every day a subtle reinforcement of her victory. In the eyes of the world, Rose was perfect. To my father, she was indispensable. And in the quiet moments when no one was watching, she savored the satisfaction of her complete triumph. The woman who had longed for years to reclaim a life that was never hers had finally achieved it. But beneath the surface, a shadow lingered. The mask of the perfect wife and mother hid the darkness that had made it all possible, the cruelty that had taken my mother's life, and the charm that bound my father to her will. And while she appeared fulfilled, her success came at the cost of love, trust, and the family she had shattered. After Rose had fully stepped into the role of my father's wife, I began to notice things that didn't sit right with me. It was the way she moved through the house with ease, how my father no longer talked about my mother, and how quickly he had embraced her, as if the years of love and life with my mother had been erased. I remembered the man my father had been, the one who laughed with my mother, who held her hand even when no one was watching, who prayed with her, built dreams with her, and loved her so deeply it seemed unshakable. And yet, within mere weeks after my mother's death, he was smiling at Rose, laughing with her, calling her his wife, treating her as though she had always belonged here. I began to wonder silently, asking myself the questions I couldn't voice aloud. How could he move on so quickly? How could he love someone else after loving Mum all these years? How did he forget her so fast? Even when Rose laughed and tried to engage me as if she cared, I couldn't shake the unease. It felt wrong, like a story being rewritten in real time, a life being stolen in plain sight. I watched him carefully, searching for traces of the man who had once been whole with my mother. But every glance, every gesture, every word he exchanged with Rose made it clear. Something had changed, something I didn't understand. At first, I blamed grief, thinking perhaps he was trying to cope in his own way. But deep down, a gnawing feeling told me it wasn't just that. The speed of his attachment to Rose, the way he seemed to forget the woman who had given him years of love, felt unnatural. It felt orchestrated. I began observing Rose more closely. The way she smiled just a little too perfectly, the timing of her visits, the ease with which she manipulated his attention, all of it seemed too precise to be coincidental. The more I watched, the more questions piled up, and the more I realized that what had happened to my father wasn't just grief or loneliness. Something else had guided his heart and mind, something deliberate. I didn't yet know the full truth, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. And in the quiet moments, when I sat alone in my room or watched my father from afar, I began to understand. Rose had not only stolen him, she had done it with careful planning, and her power over him was far greater than I could have imagined. How could he fall in love with her so quickly? And how could he forget Mum so completely? Those questions haunted me, nagging at the edges of my mind. And deep down, I knew that uncovering the answers would reveal a darkness far greater than anything I had suspected, a truth that would shake the very foundation of our family. Even as my doubts grew about how quickly my father had fallen for her, Rose continued to perfect the image of the caring wife and loving stepmother. It was a performance she maintained flawlessly, one that made anyone who looked from the outside believe she was the ideal replacement for my mother. Every morning, she woke early to prepare breakfast, making sure everything was cooked just the way my father liked it. She would often hum softly as she worked, her presence filling the house with a comforting rhythm. When I sat at the table, she would ask gently about my schoolwork, my friends, and my day, genuinely smiling at my answers. "Tell me everything," she would say, leaning in as though nothing else mattered. She never forced attention but made herself available, creating the impression that she cared deeply about me, the child my mother had left behind. She attended school events, church functions, and community gatherings, always ensuring that her involvement looked natural and selfless. Her laughter blended seamlessly with ours, her gestures seemed nurturing, and she often guided me with patience and advice, just as a mother would. Even small details were carefully executed. She learned my favorite foods, the books I loved to read, and even the little habits my mother had nurtured in me. She replicated them almost perfectly, creating a sense of continuity, a bridge between the life we had lost and the life she wanted us to accept. When my father returned home tired from work, she would greet him with warm tea and freshly baked bread. She ensured the house smelled welcoming, that our clothes were folded, and that every corner seemed peaceful and tidy. To any visitor, the house looked like it had never known tragedy, and Rose appeared to be the motherly figure holding it all together. Even in moments when I felt uneasy or skeptical about her, she had a way of softening my resistance. A gentle touch, a soothing word, a reassuring smile. She made me believe that she truly cared for both my father and me. It was exhausting to fight against her constant display of love and devotion. But beneath the surface of her perfect mothering, everything was calculated. Every act of kindness reinforced her control over the household. Every gentle word she spoke further anchored my father to her, keeping him emotionally dependent and clouded by the charm she had placed on him. Even her patience and attentiveness were strategic. They were not driven by true love, but by the need to maintain her illusion and secure her power. To the outside world, she had become the embodiment of maternal care. To my father, she was indispensable. And to me, she was a confusing mix of warmth and unease, the woman who had replaced my mother in every way, while hiding the darkness that had made it possible. For years, Rose's charm over my father had seemed unbreakable. He was obedient to her, trusting her completely and completely detached from the memories of my mother. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, cracks began to form. The spell she had woven so carefully was not eternal, and life, grief, and conscience have a way of sneaking through even the strongest enchantments. It began subtly. A phrase my father once used only for my mother slipped through in a quiet murmur, a memory tugging at his heart. A photograph I had kept hidden caught his eye one evening, and for a fleeting moment, recognition flickered in his gaze. He frowned, confused, a pang of emotion crossing his face before Rose's influence pushed it away. "David, are you all right?" Rose asked softly, her tone still calm, still perfect. I don't know," he whispered, shaking his head, as if trying to chase away a sudden, inexplicable thought. These small moments grew in number. Sometimes he would stare at nothing for long periods, muttering half-formed words, memories he couldn't quite grasp. I noticed him lingering by my mother's belongings, the ones Rose hadn't removed completely, as though a distant part of him was remembering. Could it be possible that he's remembering? I thought, my heart racing with a mix of hope and fear. The charm didn't break all at once. It faded gradually, like fog lifting from a morning field. Emotions returned first: guilt, sadness, longing, feelings that had been buried deep under the spell's weight. My father began questioning his decisions, recalling moments with my mother with a clarity that made his chest ache. He would ask me about her, quietly, almost hesitantly. "Do you remember how she used to make tea on Sundays?" "Yes, Daddy," I whispered, tears threatening to spill. These memories began to reach him more frequently, cutting through Rose's manipulations. Even in the presence of her warmth, her smiles, and her attentiveness, he began to feel unease, suspicion, and a sense of wrongness that couldn't be ignored. Rose noticed the change too. Her confident composure faltered occasionally when he paused, stared at a photograph, or muttered something about my mother. She began increasing her efforts, smiling more, praising him more, acting even kinder, but the charm's power was waning. The deeper truths of love, loyalty, and grief were starting to surface. I watched quietly, hoping and praying that this was the beginning of his awakening. It was painful to see how long it had taken, and terrifying to think of the consequences if the spell fully returned him to Rose before he remembered the truth. But the signs were clear. The charm was no longer absolute. The man who had been lost to her influence was slowly, painfully, finding his way back to reality. And with each passing day, the possibility of exposing Rose's deceit and confronting the darkness that had destroyed my mother grew stronger. The day finally came when the fog around my father's mind lifted enough for him to see clearly. The charm that had held him captive for so long had weakened, and with it came the memories, emotions, and instincts he had buried for years. Anger, betrayal, and grief erupted within him all at once, focused squarely on the woman who had destroyed his family. It began one evening when Rose, as usual, moved about the house with her carefully crafted smile, acting the devoted wife and mother. My father, standing in the living room, suddenly felt the weight of everything she had done, the lies, the manipulation, and the unspeakable truth of my mother's death. "Rose," he shouted, his voice sharp and unrecognizable, echoing through the house. She turned, startled by the sudden intensity in his tone. Her perfect composure faltered for the first time in years. "David, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice smooth but edged with panic. "Don't act like you don't know," he yelled, stepping closer, his eyes blazing. "Don't you dare pretend that all of this is innocent." Rose tried to maintain her facade, but it was too late. My father's rage had pierced the veil. He listed every suspicious act he had begun to notice. The disappearances of my mother's belongings, the subtle manipulations, the strange men he had glimpsed Rose with in secret. "You came into my house, into my life, and you killed her," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You stole my wife, you manipulated my mind, and you thought you could get away with it." Rose's face paled. For the first time, the calm, smiling mask slipped. The woman who had been so sure of her power now stood trembling, her carefully built world crumbling around her. "David, you're imagining things," she tried to say, but her voice shook, betraying her. "Imagining things," he roared, stepping closer, his voice rising with every word. "You think I don't remember the years before you came back. You think I don't see how you've manipulated me. You think I don't know what you did to her." I watched from the doorway, stunned, as the man who had been under her spell finally reclaimed himself. The anger in his eyes was raw, unfiltered, and frightening. He repeated the accusations over and over, until every lie, every hidden act, every manipulation she had done was laid bare. Rose tried to interrupt, tried to calm him, tried to charm him once more, but it was useless. The spell had finally faded, and my father's grief and fury overpowered any control she thought she still had. "Get out," he finally shouted, his voice a thunderclap that left no room for doubt. "Get out of my house, out of my life. You have no place here. You have no right to touch this family again." She faltered, panicked, and finally slunk toward the door, realizing that the game was over. The perfect wife, the attentive stepmother, the gentle presence, all of it was gone. She had nothing left except the truth she had tried so hard to hide, now exposed in the harsh, angry words of a man she had tried to control. For the first time, the house felt like it could breathe again. The tension Rose had imposed for years was gone, replaced by the raw, unfiltered reality of justice and truth. My father, though shaking and exhausted, finally looked at me with clear eyes. There was pain, yes, but also a sense of relief. He had reclaimed himself, and the shadow that had haunted our family for so long was finally forced into the light. After my father's harsh confrontation, Rose stumbled back, her composure shattered. The mask she had worn so perfectly for years was gone. Her eyes, once filled with calculated charm, were now wide with fear, guilt, and desperation. She had been cornered, and she knew it. "David, I never meant," she began, her voice trembling. "Never meant," my father's voice cracked with rage and sorrow. "You killed her. You destroyed her life, my life, our family. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She sank into a chair, her head bowed, and for the first time the truth spilled out. I asked them. The men, I wanted her out of the way. I thought if she was gone, we could be together. I used a charm on you. Her words hit like a hammer. I felt my chest tighten, my stomach turn, and tears blurred my vision. Every lie, every manipulation, every act of cruelty she had hidden behind smiles and warmth was now raw and undeniable. You killed Mum, I whispered, my voice breaking, my body shaking. I didn't mean for her to die, Rose sobbed, covering her face. I only wanted you two apart. I didn't know it would. I didn't know. My father stood frozen, his face pale, his hands trembling. Anger, grief, and disbelief collided inside him. He sank to his knees beside her, not to comfort, but because the weight of the truth threatened to crush him. She is gone, Rose, gone because of you, he whispered, voice hoarse, tears streaming down his face. My wife, your lies, everything, how could you? I fell to my knees too, clutching the space where my mother's presence used to be, wishing she could appear and erase this nightmare. My father's sobs mixed with mine, a sound of pure anguish, grief, and betrayal. For years, we had lived under her control, unknowingly honoring the woman who had destroyed our lives, and now the truth burned like fire in our hearts. Rose continued to cry, realizing the enormity of what she had done. She had taken more than a wife. She had taken a mother, a family's trust, and years of love. She had manipulated hearts and minds for her own desire, and now she was faced with the full weight of it. I am sorry, I could, she stammered. Sorry, my father screamed, voice breaking again. Sorry won't bring her back. Nothing you say will ever fix this. You stole her life and you tried to steal mine. And now you must leave. For the first time, Rose truly felt powerless. The charm that had bent my father's mind, the careful facade she had maintained, all of it crumbled in the face of raw truth and the grief of those she had wronged. We were left in silence after she left, the house filled with echoes of pain and loss. My father sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands, sobs shaking him. I knelt beside him, holding him tightly, feeling the emptiness and the weight of everything my mother had been taken from us. She was everything, my father whispered between sobs. And I couldn't see it. I couldn't stop her. It's not your fault, Daddy, I whispered, clutching his arm. We'll remember her. We'll carry her love. She's still here in us. That night, the house felt emptier than ever, but it also felt real. The mask was gone. The lies were gone. And though grief and anger would take years to heal, for the first time, we faced the truth together, raw, painful, and undeniable. My mother's absence was a wound that could never fully close, but the light of truth, even painful, shone brighter than the shadows Rose had created.